Thank you. You may be seated. I'm going to have a relatively abbreviated sermon today because I'm not the main event. The main event is going to be listening to these wonderful people that are kind of sitting here towards the front about our various ministries here at St. Francis. But let me just make a few comments here this morning about our gospel passage today. It is the same thing again. It's a little bit like that old Herman's Hermit song. Second verse, same as the first. Here we are once again, right? The disciples are hearing Jesus say things. Jesus says to them, I'm going to be handed over, I'm going to be killed and rise again. And once again, they don't get it. Just like last week, they didn't understand what he was saying. Amazingly, this is right after, we didn't read it, it's a little passage between the one last week and this week's passage of the Transfiguration. We usually celebrate the Transfiguration on the last Sunday before Lent begins, or on August 6th, sometimes we do. But at the Transfiguration, Jesus is transfigured before them. They see the dead alive. They see Moses and Elijah. And when Jesus is talking about dying and rising again, they don't get it. They don't understand. That's a repeating theme throughout the Gospel of Mark, that they don't understand. They don't get the picture. It's only at the end of the Gospel that they begin to understand. And quite frankly, for most of us, sometimes the whole thing about dying and rising again, even though we say it in our creeds all the time, we don't always get it. It's a mystery. And yet there we are. But the biggest thing is then when they get to Capernaum, they're getting back to sort of the hometown, the home base where they've been operating in Galilee. They're in the house now, and they're gathered together, and Jesus turns to them and says, what were you talking about on the way? And all you hear is silence. Silence. Because it's that moment, when you're talking about something and you're caught out. You're caught out saying something that you shouldn't have said, or caught out doing something you shouldn't have done. Jesus caught them. Because instead of talking about, well, let's unpack what Jesus means here about dying and rising again, they're talking about, I wonder which one of us is the greatest, right? Now remember, this transfiguration business happens right before this. So the transfiguration, it's Peter, James, and John that get taken up the mountain. And so they're up there and they see the grand vision. So I can imagine Peter, James, and John are saying, well, we saw the great vision on the mountain. And the other disciples are saying, well, what are we, chopped liver, right? We were called too. So aren't we just as important? And then there's a business about healing someone, and they're not able to heal this person. And Jesus rebukes them. And so there's this argument going back and forth. Of course, James in our epistle today talks about envy and ambition and all these things that get involved. We want certain things. We want certain positions and authority, and it keeps us from having it. So Jesus focuses on what's really important. And sometimes even I need to be reminded on what's really important. Whenever we get wrapped up in problems and difficulties, the home base for everything should be, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? It's not about me. It's not about you. It's not about any individual person. We do this to serve God, to love God, to serve others, and love others. That is ultimately why we're here. There's a lot of other places we could be on a Sunday morning, right? We could be other places. We could be on the golf course. We could be at our club. We could be doing something else. If we're not here about serving and loving God and serving and loving others, then really there's no point to being here. And Jesus reminds them. He takes a little child and he sets a little child amongst them. I was going to see if there's a little child out there and bring him up, but it's COVID and we can't do any of that stuff, right? So we won't do that. But Jesus sets a little child on his lap. Now, in that society, children were truly meant to not be seen and not heard, and maybe not even seen. Children were to be with the women tucked away somewhere. They weren't involved. We've come a long way. We've gotten a lot better. But Jesus says, if anyone welcomes one like this little child, they welcome me. So the unseen, the unknown, the least of these, if you will, are the ones that should be welcomed. And Jesus says, if any one of you wants to be great, they must be the servant of all. And that word servant, diakonos in the Greek, can also be translated minister. So I know I'm the priest and I'm the guy standing up here in the fancy, funny garb, right, doing all the stuff, right? But really, I'm not the minister. I am a minister. But all of you are ministers too. In a few moments, we're going to hear from some of the many ministers of our congregation. And the work that they do is no less important than the work that I do. In many ways, it's more important and more loving because I'm getting paid to do what I do. They're doing it from their heart because they love this church and they love you and they love God. So I'm thankful to all of them and to all of you and even you out there for the many ways in which you serve, minister. And I pray more of you will say, what can I do? Maybe you'll hear something this morning say, how can I minister in some way, shape, or form to our community and show my love for God and for others? Amen.